We're halfway through the week. Hello and welcome to Arirang News. I'm Lee in Seoul. So, are we finally beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel? During the South Korean delegation's visit to Pyongyang, North Korea expressed a willingness to abandon its nuclear program if its safety could be guaranteed. Now, the two Koreas have also agreed to a rare leader summit next month at the two countries' heavily armed border. To this, the U.S. responded with cautious optimism, with President Trump saying that North Korea seems sincere in its reported offer to hold nuclear talks. And before we sit down with an expert to talk more about this, we first head over to the news center where our Devin Whiting has the latest headlines at this hour. Hello, Devin.
Hi, Jiyoon. President Moon Jae-in held a luncheon meeting today at the Blue House with the leaders of the country's 5 major political parties. The main topic was cross-border relations. Coming a day after the South Korean delegation returned from their visit to North Korea, President Moon updated the party leaders on the recent developments, as well as the details of his government's agreements with the North. The president stressed that it's a critical juncture on the peninsula when it comes to peace and denuclearization, saying it's too early for optimism and that Seoul is closely communicating with Washington on the matter. After the talks, party officials said in a press briefing that the president made clear that the latest thaw in relations will not lead to an easing of sanctions, and that the issue of denuclearization, or the North's nuclear program, is of international concern. It was the third meeting of its kind since President Moon took office last May, and the first time the gathering was joined by the leader of the main opposition, Liberty Korea Party, Hong Joon-pyo. Hong boycotted previous meetings but accepted the invite this time, he said, in view of the grave security situation. U.S. President Donald Trump says the meeting between President Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un has the potential to be a great thing for the world. But Washington is still cautious and says its pressure campaign on North Korea will continue for the time being. Kwon Jang-ho has this report.
We'll see what happens. That's the US president's reaction on hearing that North Korea is open to talks with the United States. Later, he also tweeted, for the first time in many years, a serious effort is being made by all parties concerned. Maybe false hope, but the US is ready to go hard in either direction. It's a sentiment he repeated later, but he was also quick to credit his administration and himself for bringing about the current situation.
I think that they are sincere, but I think they're sincere also because the sanctions and what we're doing with respect to North Korea, including, the great help that we've been given from China.
Trump declined to comment on whether he had any preconditions for talks, simply calling it a very tenuous situation. Vice President Mike Pence, meanwhile, stressed that although they will see which way talks go, in the meantime, the campaign of sanctions and pressure will continue until they see, quote, credible, verifiable and concrete steps towards denuclearization. US intelligence officials also reiterated this stance while expressing doubt over whether the current situation could be considered a significant breakthrough.
Hope springs eternal, but we need to learn a lot more relative to these talks. North Korea has to agree to not possess nuclear capability. And until that happens, we cannot have an agreement with them, and that is our position.
South Korea's presidential envoys who met with Kim Jong-un will travel to the US on Thursday to directly brief Washington on the outcome of their visit and further explore the possibility for US-North Korea talks. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, North Korea's 24-member delegation for the Paralympics arrived in South Korea today. 2 of them are cross-country skiers who will be competing on March 11th and March 14th. The rest are officials, trainers, and a few athletes who will just be watching. They arrived using the western land route near Paju and headed to Pyeongchang by bus. The North Koreans were invited by the International Paralympic Committee to fill 2 slots in the para-Nordic skiing events. They'll be returning home around March 15th. Pyeongchang will be hosting the largest ever Paralympics with 570 athletes from 49 countries taking part. The trade spat between U.S. President Donald Trump and the European Union has spilled over into the automobile industry. Trump has responded to Brussels' threat to put its own tariffs on U.S. imports with a threat to clamp down on imports of European cars. Lee Seung-jae reports.
The back and forth of tariff threats between U.S. President Donald Trump and the European Union rumbles on, with Trump now threatening to impose heavy tariffs on all European cars. His response comes as the EU threatened to slap hefty tariffs on American import goods such as Levi's jeans, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, and bourbon whiskey. This is the latest indication that President Trump is standing by his decision to impose a 25% tariff on steel imports and a 10% tariff on aluminum imports globally, despite pressure from home and abroad. The U.S. leader has long seized on what he believes to be unfair trade barriers, citing that European cars can be seen everywhere on the streets of New York, but few American cars are ever spotted on European expressways. But stronger tariffs on European cars could hurt the U.S. as well. BMW President Harald Kruger warned such tariffs would hurt jobs in the world's second-largest car market, mentioning its plant located in South Carolina. According to the German Automobile Industry Association, German automakers exported some 500,000 cars to the U.S. last year, but also increased production at their U.S. factories, where they employ tens of thousands of people. This comes as U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said on Tuesday that Mexico and Canada won't be affected by the steel and aluminum tariffs if NAFTA renegotiations are successful. President Trump tweeted on Monday morning that the tariffs will not apply to their neighbors if NAFTA talks go well, adding that Canada must treat U.S. farmers better and that Mexico must do much more on stopping drugs from pouring into the U.S. The world waits to see if President Trump does indeed go forward with this tariff proposal and how it will affect the global economy. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
In what may become a historic breakthrough, North Korea has told South Korea's presidential envoys in Pyongyang that it's open to talks with the U.S. on ending its nuclear efforts. The two Koreas have also agreed to hold a leader summit next month. Our Moon Gun-young has more details.
South and North Korea have agreed to hold the third leaders summit at Peace House in Panmunjom in late April. For this, we agreed to hold working-level talks.
The Peace House is a building that sits on the South Korean side of the so-called Truce Village that straddles the border. And if the summit is held here, it would mark the first time a North Korean leader has stepped on South Korean soil since the end of the Korean War in early 1950s. South Korea's chief presidential envoy to North Korea briefed the press Tuesday night, just hours after a charter flight carrying the 10-member delegation returned home following a two-day visit to North Korea. In a remarkable development that followed unprecedented talks in Pyongyang, South Korea said North Korea is willing to talk to the U.S. about giving up its nuclear weapons and has agreed to refrain from conducting nuclear and missile tests while engaging in dialogue. Before South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un meet for the first inter-Korean summit in over a decade, the two sides will, for the first time, open a communication hotline by which Moon and Kim will be able to reach each other directly.
North Korea clearly stated its willingness to denuclearize. It also clarified that it had no reason to retain nuclear weapons if the military threat to North Korea is resolved and regime security is guaranteed.
It's a positive statement that caught many by surprise, but when parsed, comes with significant caveats. Pyongyang's reference to eliminating military threat against the regime could run counter to U.S. priorities, which has 28,500 troops stationed in South Korea.
Along with Seo-hun, director of the National Intelligence Service, and others, I will soon be visiting the U.S. to explain the outcome of our North Korea visit. We also plan to visit China and Russia following the U.S. trip.
Despite the caveats, the agreements represent a significant diplomatic accomplishment for South Korean President Moon Jae-in, who used the Winter Olympic Games to engineer a thaw in relations with the North that had previously seemed a distant prospect. Moon Gun-young, Arirang News, The Blue House.
And to tell us more about the outcome of the envoys meeting in North Korea, Professor Kim Hyun-wook from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy joins us in the studio today. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you very much.
All right, so we began to sense a thaw in inter-Korea relations ever since Kim Jong-un, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, during his New Year's address, said that it wishes to engage with South Korea. And then the inter-Korean talks came, and then North Korea participated in the Winter Olympics. So a lot has happened in just a matter of like 2 months, and we saw sudden improvement in inter-Korea ties.
Yeah, it seems like only a short amount of time things got evolved very quickly. So when we look at the Chinese case, which in 1960 tested the nuclear weapons and afterwards began to have a dialogue with the Soviet Union. So I think it was expected that North Korea, after it pronouncing itself as a nuclear state, completing the nuclear capabilities, maybe it would be very active to have a dialogue with South Korea and the United States. So I think after the end of last year, in which North Korea finally completed its nuclear capabilities, I think North and South Korea has already began a behind-the-scene diplomacies. So maybe they have prepared talks about the Pyeongchang Olympic Games and talks and preparations about this possible summit and meeting at the time. So things have moved very quickly. I mean, there were a lot of talks about the summit meetings, especially during the Pyeongchang Olympic Games. Of course, Pyeongchang Olympic Games provided a very important opportunity window for these kinds of improvements. But I think the talk itself began maybe sometime late, last year, I think.
Now, and of course, in a key turn of events, North Korea expressed a willingness to actually abandon its nuclear program, only if its safety could be guaranteed. Tell us more about this.
I think this is a very clear change of its attitude. Lately, North Korea repeatedly mentioned that dialogue is possible under the assumption that North Korea becomes a nuclear state. So many experts doubted whether North Korea would be willingly say it would denuclearize itself in its talk with the United States. So I think, yesterday's agreement between two Koreas, North Korea, Kim Jong-un saying that it would denuclearize itself is a very, important outcome of the agreement. But the thing we have to be cautious is that it is not something unconditional. I mean, give some conditions that the U.S. anti-North Korea policy should be abolished, and also the regime security and safety of the North Korean regime should be guaranteed by the United States. So all these kinds of conditions, I'm not sure what will be the position of the United States. Maybe we have to check the position of the United States when the National Security Advisor Chung Eui-yong visits the United States, and then even afterwards, North and South, North Korea and the U.S. might meet for some preliminary talks in which they would talk about some important conditions and settle down their positions about the denuclearization of North Korea. So things are still going on. We cannot be sure for now.
All right, but it is a big change that North Korea has decided to put denuclearization on the agenda, right? Well, now the two Koreas also agreed to install, for the first time, a communication hotline through which the two leaders could talk to each other over on the phone directly.
Yes, it's a very important outcome. I mean, we have a hotline with the United States, with China, Xi Jinping. We call Xi Jinping, the problem is that he hardly receives a phone call by our leader. And we never had these kinds of hotlines, I mean, with North Korean leader. I mean, this is very important, measures to lower the tensions in the Korean Peninsula, and also signals that Kim Jong-un is really seriously considering the North-South rapprochement and the summit meeting. I think he's kind of worrying about the current the U.S. policy, strong hardline policy towards North Korea, and wants to have a very quick, restoration of two Korea's relations.
Now, according to National Security Office Chief Chung Eui-yong, North Korea had, quote-unquote, no particular demands and just wanted to be considered as a serious partner in dialogue. So what can we make of this statement?
I think this is a very basic position of North Korea in relation to the U.S.'s, anti-North Korea policies. Maybe this would include a U.S.-South Korea joint military exercises, but I think fundamentally the U.S. attitude is the problem from the North Korean side. I mean, U.S. kept repeatedly calling North Korea as a rogue state, a dictatorship. It's not a normal state. I mean, it has problems, in the human rights situations of its people. So the U.S. is not thinking North Korea as a normal state. Doesn't think Kim Jong-un as a truthfully leader that works for its people. That kind of impressions and images that the U.S. has about North Korea is something that bothers Kim Jong-un. So I think this is something that North Korea is giving a message to the United States. U.S. has to change the impressions about North Korea first if U.S. seriously wants to change the nuclear status of North Korea.
Now, the two Koreas, of course, agreed to hold a summit in April in the Peace House in the Panmunjom.
Yes.
Now, what's the reason behind this place, the choice of this place instead of the summits being held in Pyongyang, the North Korean capital?
Maybe there were some opinions that, okay, we had a first and second summit meeting in Pyongyang. This time it should be in the South Korean territory, whether in Seoul or not. Maybe Kim Jong-un is aware of that and also wants to show that Kim Jong-un is a leader that is representing North Korea as, normal state. I mean, if it's not a normal state, the leader of North Korea before usually invited South Korean leader to Pyongyang, afraid of being out there somewhere. I mean, always there is a fear that North Korea is a hermit country, does not want to show its people the outside world, things like that. But this time, I think Kim Jong-un is trying to be very active and confident of himself, trying to give outside and trying to give North Korea an impression that North Korea is now becoming a normal state. So all these kinds of, purposes making him to be there, not on the North Korean territory, but South Korean territory. Even inside the Panmunjom area, the Pyeonghwa House, the Peace House, is in the South Korean territory. I think it's symbolically very important gesture.
And I think it's also interesting that it was the first time that the envoys got to meet Kim Jong-un in that headquarters of the Workers' Party, right?
Yeah, I think this is a very ideal places for two leaders come to their borders to meet each other.
Now, it's interesting that North Korea's state TV broadcaster showed a 10-minute long footage of the meeting between Kim Jong-un and the South Korean envoys. Isn't that kind of unusual?
Yes, always try not to show something about the North Korea. Of course, this is still criticized because, a lot of media journalists from South Korea were not allowed to, check out what's going on inside the summit meetings. But later on, they showed the, footages of, what has happened. So I think still this is a very big change from the past. I think, as I mentioned, Kim Jong-un is now trying to give to the world that North Korea is a normal state, not a bad state, not a rogue state. During the Pyeongchang Olympic Games, he tried to send out the, orchestra and other art groups and teams to show to the South Korean people that North Korea is peace-loving country. We are, the same people as the South Korean people. Orchestra was playing very regular and normal songs.
Not propaganda.
Yeah, not propaganda. Yes. So all these kinds of images, something Kim Jong-un is trying to give to the South Korean people. And this time, the footage thing, media, shows to South Korea also is some kinds of these kinds of purposes.
Now, there were also concerns over the upcoming joint military drills between Seoul and Washington, which has been postponed because of the Olympics. Now, Kim Jong-un apparently said that he understands about the drills coming up in April. So tell us more about this.
The U.S. position is that it would never, ever cancel or postpone the U.S.-South Korea military exercise that's scheduled in April. They think that it is not fair to give up the military exercises in exchange for the North Korean stop and moratorium of nuclear and missile tests. I think this is a very good gesture that Kim Jong-un is saying that, okay, you go ahead and do your drills. I mean, we don't care. We think that also, we understand your position that drill is something justifiable. I think this is a very good gesture to the United States that, I mean, North Korea would not, bother about those drills, would not, trigger any, problems because there lies ahead a possible North Korea-U.S. dialogue.
Right.
And second, I think he already knows that U.S. would not postpone the drills, even though he asks for the postpone. So I think, all these kinds of messages is a very, very clear signal that he is very strategically calculating what would happen in the possible U.S.-North Korea dialogue and what his position should be. And, he's trying his best to accommodate the U.S. for the purpose of deal with North Korea, I think.
And like we heard in previous reports, obviously U.S., the United States and President Trump had cautiously reacted to all these outcome of the meeting. So tell us about the U.S. reaction, as well as could we expect an official dialogue between the U.S. and North Korea in the near future?
President Trump's reaction was that, okay, he loves the agreement, but he tweeted again, okay, we'll see what's going to happen. So I think this is a very natural responses that we could expect from the U.S. side. Of course, some intelligence directors were very skeptical about this agreement. I mean, still there lies some, North Korean strategies and tactics to deal with, South Korea, to divide the U.S.-South Korea alliance, something like that. But I think, first-hand impressions and responses from Trump was very positive. But as has been talking on and on, he prefers a direct talk with North Korea. I mean, when he heard that throughout the South Korean media or South Korean delegates that North Korea is ready to have a talk with the United States, his first response was that, okay, this is something that I heard through South Korea. I want a direct message from North Korea. And this time, the result of two Korea's agreement is not something directly delivered by North Korea, but something that delivered by South Korea. South Korean delegates, media report is something that has contained all the result and outcome of agreements.
Right.
So, maybe U.S. would think, okay, this is a message by South Korea. What will be the real message by North Korea? I think the U.S. should be and would be very skeptical what would be the genuine messages and intention of a North Korean leader.
But you think chances are a little bit higher than before after this envoy meeting?
Yeah, I think North Korea-U.S. dialogue would be open. What is important than what? I mean, they would talk about the conditions and process of denuclearization. The U.S. would try to check whether North Korea is seriously considering denuclearization. U.S. does not want to repeat any mistakes by the past governments. So all these kind of things are still making us feel that it is still not certain whether denuclearization talk will be successful in the future.
All right, then what's your outlook on some other humanitarian and aid issues involving North Korea?
I think, those contacts and, exchanges and cooperation between two Korea is not against any, sanctions, international sanctions. So those exchanges and those contacts would evolve very quickly, I think. And North-South practical level talk would deal with that. And I think, I'm not sure, but still North Korea would accept South Korean proposals like these, and also possibly separate family reunion issues. They're not against any measures of international sanctions.
All right, then what are some of the tasks remaining before the Leaders Summit in April?
I think, we have summit meeting scheduled in late April. And I don't think denuclearization talk between the North Korea and the U.S. would have any substantial outcome until then. So after the summit meeting, still North Korea, U.S. would continue talks? And what if the talk is broken down? What if they decided not to talk anymore?
Right.
I mean, then case, U.S. would continue very harsh policy towards North Korea. South Korean position would be really in dilemma. I mean, we have to have in accord with the U.S. about our policy towards North Korea, but at the same time, two Korea's relationship has come up to the level of summit meeting. So I think that kind of situation is something we have to be wary of, and so that it would not happen, we have to continuously be diplomatic with North Korea and with the United States so that their talk will be successful in the future.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our program, but make sure to tune in to Arirang News for more domestic and global news updates throughout the day. Thanks for watching and goodbye.